Everyone, my name is Waqar Chaudhary, and I am the Technology Evangelist here at NuoDB. Thank you for joining the 3 Steps to Migrate from MySQL webinar. Today's webinar will cover why migrate, a brief NuoDB overview, and a migration demo, followed by a Q&A. Of course, you're welcome to type in your Q&A directly into the GoToMeeting Q&A section that you'll find near the chat windows, and I'll be able to answer all of your questions towards the end of the webinar. And if I'm not able to get to your questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A window anyway, and we'll be sure to post all of the answers to your questions directly into our community forum on the NuoDB Dev Center. So I've been working in the database industry for well over a decade now. In almost every place where I've worked, a typical MySQL architecture might look like something that you're seeing on the screen right now. You'll start off with some kind of caching layer in order to handle high-speed reads. Then you'll have some kind of a session management structure that handles MySQL replication and also hosts the failover utilities. And then you'll have an e-commerce site that's processing all kinds of transactions per second that's being replicated into a MySQL replica for operational analytics. You may also have a content management system that's sharded n number of ways to handle all of the content that your system might need, and also all of the transactions on top of that content that are taking place. In addition, you may also have a community center where you allow your customers to interact with each other as well as your support staff. And to tie everything together, you're using MySQL Enterprise Monitor to handle any kind of failures, alerts, or upgrades that you need to take place. And then all of this is typically backed up by a SAN. So obviously nobody's architecture actually looks like this on day one. This is something that happens over time, happens incrementally. And once you get here, this type of structure is very easy to upgrade, very easy to maintain, and very easy to add capacity to, right? Right. What could possibly go wrong? Many of you have been with NuoDB for some time now. However, there are many people on this webinar today that are joining us for the first time. Let me introduce NuoDB, NewSQL without compromise. It's built from the ground up on a distributed architecture designed for geo-distributed data management. It provides you with scale-out performance, zero downtime, and it's a proven ACID SQL solution. Let me begin by explaining what I mean by distributed architecture. Here's an example of a simple deployment. You can deploy a single logical NuoDB database on a single host. There are 3 main components of each NuoDB database that consist of a broker, transaction engine, and storage manager. All 3 of these combined equal one database. Now, you can deploy a database on a single host, or you can distribute a database across multiple hosts. The left-hand side of this slide represents a single host deployment where a broker, a transaction engine, and a storage manager all live on a host machine within a local data center. The right-hand side splits up the deployment between the cloud and the local data center, where the cloud is hosting a broker and a transaction engine, and the data center is hosting the storage manager and a file system. Now, before I get ahead of myself here, brokers essentially manage connections between client applications and transaction engines. Transaction engines are responsible for actually processing the SQL that the client is requesting. And storage managers represent the D in ACID. They make sure that all of the data within the system is made durable on some form of disk. Unlike MySQL and traditional databases, NuoDB doesn't require any kind of sharding or replication strategy that you would typically associate with scaling a database. When you want to scale NuoDB, you simply add more processes. In this example, what I've done is I've simply added additional transaction engines, which essentially enable the database to go faster. The more transaction engines you add, the faster the database goes. You should see near linear scalability each time you double your transaction engines that are playing within a single domain. A NuoDB domain is essentially just a container for all of the physical and virtual machines that can participate in one or more databases. In this example, I've shown what a typical domain might look like within a given data center. You'll have a mix of host machines, some running Linux operating systems and others running Windows and others running something else. NuoDB actually supports heterogeneous deployment across any resources that are available within a given domain. It doesn't care if it's being deployed on a Linux machine or a Windows machine, or both. Regardless of your deployment environment, scale NuoDB out and in instantly. You can take a single NuoDB database and geodistribute it across multiple data centers and multiple cloud environments. This is a key component of what makes NuoDB so unique in terms of its scalability and high availability. Any one of these processes can fail or scale independently. An additional benefit of this type of deployment strategy is that it actually pushes the data where your customers are. For example, if you geodistribute your data centers, one in Japan, one in New York, one in LA, all of your global customers, as they're using your applications, will experience much better response times, low latency, and an overall more pleasant user experience. To learn more about NuoDB and geodistributed data management, definitely visit our website, www.nuodb.com. One of the great things about NuoDB is that it works with many of the most popular languages, ORM technologies, and tools that you guys are already using. So whether you're a Java developer, a .NET developer, PHP or Node, and whether you use Hibernate or Entity Framework, NuoDB will simply just work. We ship out of the box with ODBC and JDBC drivers, and all the other drivers are available on GitHub as open source. So I imagine by now I've convinced many of you that NuoDB is the right alternative to MySQL. However, I do understand that ripping out MySQL, or any other database for that matter, is not that simple. So how about we come up with a hybrid solution? In this diagram here, what I'm representing is a MySQL replication strategy into NuoDB. And in today's webinar, I'm going to cover how to actually migrate your existing schema and data out of MySQL into NuoDB before we get into replication. That'll be a topic for another webinar. Okay, so I know I've thrown a lot at you so far. So if any of you have any questions, once again, please feel free to type them into the Q&A section of GoToWebinar, and we'll be sure to answer your questions at the end of this webinar, or if we don't get to your question, don't worry, we'll definitely answer it. We'll take all the questions that anybody's posted in today's webinar and post them to our community forum, which you can find on our Dev Center. It's www.nuodb.com/Dev Center. All right, now for the reason that everybody's here, the demo. Okay, so what I've done so far is I've switched to my Ubuntu VM, and what I'd like to do is walk you guys through some of the prerequisites that I've already installed. So I'm using Ubuntu 12.10 with Java, with the Java home variable set. I'm using MySQL Server configured with JDBC. I have a FoodMart database that's configured and loaded into MySQL with a bunch of cubes pre-processed already in it. And I'm using the Saiku Analytics tool, and I'm pointing it to the FoodMart database, and the tool's port is 8081. This is of importance because port 8080 is actually used by NuoDB, which you'll see momentarily. And not to worry, for a complete step-by-step guide on installing the prerequisites in your own VM or environment, we will be publishing a NuoDB blog that will show you exactly what to do if it's not already there. And you can actually check at www.nuodb.com/techblog. All right, so let me quickly walk you through what the setup is on my machine, starting with MySQL. So let me just flip open to the MySQL workbench. And what I've done is I've downloaded and installed the FoodMart, which would be available to you on the blog, and essentially it's functional. So I've just selected the first 1,000 records from the accounts table, and if I wanted to, I can go ahead and select the first 1,000 records from any other table that exists in MySQL. Okay, so let's flip over to Chrome here, and what we're looking at here is the Saiku Online Analytics tool. And essentially what we're doing here is I'm pointing this tool to the FoodMart database that exists in MySQL. And the idea for this demo is going to be to migrate this data that's in MySQL into NuoDB and then point this tool to NuoDB just to show you guys that it's going to work exactly the same. So right now there's a bunch of cubes that are already set up in here. I'm using the sales cube in particular. and I'm essentially pulling the profit measure and then the dimensions, brand name and product name. So I've essentially created a little pivot table here based on brand name, product name, and how profitable that particular product is within a given brand. Now, if I wanted to, I can easily switch this stuff around, and I can go the other direction. I can also bring in other measures to give you an idea of what else is there. So let's flip this around. My opinion, this is a much better view. So here's sort of the cost, here's the profit, so you can imagine what this would look like. There are other capabilities in here as well, so I can do a little bar chart, I can do a stacked bar, I can do a line, I can do a pie chart, a bunch of different options. It's a very rich tool, and we'll be able to see the same type of functionality working right on top of NuoDB momentarily. So the other thing that I've done is I've already installed NuoDB as part of my prerequisites. And anytime you install NuoDB, if you're on a Windows machine or a Mac machine, the installation process itself will generally bring up the console once the installation is complete. However, that's not supported in Linux, so the way that I brought up the console within NuoDB is by executing this simple command. I just navigate to the jar file within the NuoDB directory, and I execute the NuoDB web console jar. And once that runs, you're able to bring up NuoDB, and it's going to be on localhost port 8080. So just to get you guys quickly acclimated with the screen here, so on the home screen for NuoDB, you'll see a bunch of quick starts and tools and samples right out of the box. So the quick start is essentially just a simple NuoDB database with some ice hockey statistics in it. So if you're an ice hockey buff, definitely run the quick start. It'll give you an idea of how to configure a database, and you can have some fun with some of those statistics. Next is the admin screen, which is sort of the centralized monitoring application that's part of the web console. So it allows you to manage your hosts that are running within the system, and also it gives you a snapshot of all the different databases that you might be running on top of those hosts. Next is the Explorer. It's our own version of what you just saw in terms of the MySQL Workbench, except ours is baked right into our web tool. You don't have to download anything separately. As soon as you install NuoDB and launch the NuoDB console, boom, it's right there for you. Next we have a storefront demo that we ship with. Now this is a pretty neat tool that you guys could use to kind of figure out, hey, if I'm running into workload type A versus workload type B, how many resources do I need to provision? Also, it's pretty cool from a user experience perspective. You can actually configure different load scenarios to see how the front-end application might be affected based on how many people are logged in, how many transactions are taking place per second. All that's configurable for you right within the storefront demo, something that I highly recommend. Also, please note that this demo, when you're connected to the internet, will be able to pull pictures and descriptions of things from Amazon.com, and when you're not connected to the internet, you will not see pictures or descriptions. So don't worry, it's not broken. It's actually designed to work in both modes. When you're connected, it just gives you a more pleasant user experience. Last but not least, it's a direct pointer to our GitHub site. So there's tons more samples out there. Also, all of our drivers and tools are open source, including the migrator that we're going to be demonstrating in today's webinar. Definitely go to the GitHub page, check out what else is out there, and feel free to download, use, or contribute however you see fit. Okay, so the goal of today's webinar is to get this data that's in MySQL out of MySQL and into NuoDB, and then point the SciQ analytics tool to NuoDB and generate the same type of report. All right, let's get started. So a few housekeeping items here. One of the things that you have to do with NuoDB is specify a directory where you're going to persist the data for your database. And what I've done is I've created a databases folder in my home directory, and I'm going to create a database in the console called DemoDB, and all the data for DemoDB is going to be persisted in this folder. So let's go ahead and do that. And we do that by going to the console, going to the admin, and then the admin essentially gives you this quick guide on the left-hand side. Each time you install NuoDB, it just basically gives you an overview of the different editions that exist. And in the admin, I have a single host machine, which is a local machine that's running. And one of the things that I want to do on this machine is start a database. So I'll call my database DemoDB and hit next. And what it's asking me to do right now is select a location where my database should be persisted, and it's going to be /home/nuo/admin/databases/demodb, and hit submit, hit next. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to add a transaction engine, hit next, and we'll create a username and password, and the username would just be DBA, password bird, next, and I confirm that I want to create this, hit finish, and it successfully created my DemoDB. It's as simple as that. Now I can go into Explore, and you should see that there's a database in there, and my password is DBA bird login, and there are no schemas in here as of right now. Okay, so the name of this demo isn't how to create a database in NuoDB. It's actually 3 steps to migrate your MySQL database into NuoDB. So let's go ahead and let me quickly show you what those 3 steps are. So step 1 is to simply replicate the schema out of MySQL into NuoDB, and I'm going to use the NuoDB migration tools to do that. Now, the way that I'm using the tools is by downloading them directly from GitHub and then compiling them on my Ubuntu machine. However, it may not be necessary for you guys to do this if you're downloading the latest version of NuoDB, as the migration tool is actually a part of the software download. So all this first step is going to do is it's going to call out to the NuoDB migrator. It's going to use the MySQL JDBC driver, and it's going to latch on to the FoodMart database within MySQL. And I'm just going to use a username and a password to connect to it. And then at the same time, I'm going to specify the target database within NuoDB and the name of the schema, which is going to be FoodMart. And then I'm just going to pass in the username and password that we created for that database as well. So let's just go ahead and copy this out and give it a try. And just like that, we have created the schema within NuoDB. So if we go ahead and refresh, DBA, bird, and now we have a FoodMart schema. So right now the schema is empty. It's just the definition of all the tables that existed in the MySQL database. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to actually dump all of the data out of MySQL and put that into NuoDB. So now there's a number of different ways that I could have done this. The first way would have been to maybe use the MySQL dump utility and then try to load the data into NuoDB manually. However, there are some differences in data types that you would have to account for manually if you had taken that approach, whereas if you use the NuoDB migrator tool, all of the schema data type differences are accounted for, and the migrator tool knows exactly what to do with what data types exist out there. The other way that I could have done this is by using an ETL tool such as Talend or Pentaho and created a simple data flow that connected to MySQL, sucked all of the data out of MySQL, and then pushed it into NuoDB. However, that would have required me to set up multiple data flows, figure out all the transformations between MySQL and NuoDB in the data flow itself, and probably would have been way more time consuming than just following these 3 steps. So the next step in actually moving the data is actually getting it out of MySQL, and we'll just go ahead and use this command one more time. And while this is running, I'll go ahead and explain what it's doing. It's simply reconnecting to the same MySQL database. Now, instead of migrating the schema, we're using the dump flag, and what it's going to do is it's actually going to output all of the data into a CSV file called foodmart.cat, and then once this is done running, we'll be able to then load that data directly into NuoDB. So looks like it's done. The next part is to take that data that we dumped out of MySQL and push that data into NuoDB. And let me just quickly go back and show you guys exactly what this thing is doing. So it's the same path. We're using the NuoDB migrator. Before the flag was set to schema, then dump. Now it's set to load, and we're basically pointing it to the target that we want to load the data into, which is the demo DB with the schema being foodmart, and then the username and password, and then the input path is simply the file that we created by using the previous step, the dump step. Okay, let's go back, take a look, and it looks like it's almost done. So as soon as this wraps up, I'll show you exactly what the data inside of NuoDB looks like. So let's go back here, and let's go ahead and query one of these tables here. Okay, so querying in NuoDB works very similar to the MySQL Workbench, except in NuoDB, all you have to do is you go to the table that you want to query, and I'll go ahead and query the same exact one that I did in the MySQL side, which is the customer table. You simply double-click, and what it'll do is it'll select the first 1,000 records automatically for you. So right now we should be at parity with the MySQL database. So the same tables and the same data now exists in both places. So that kind of wraps up the 3 steps of actually migrating the data. As you can see, it actually takes, from a click perspective, much longer to just get the whole MySQL and the NuoDB databases set up. But from a migration perspective, it's really just those 3 simple steps that I showed you on the command line. Okay, so now that we know that the database works and the migration was successful, let's click back here to a little cheat sheet that I have going on. What we have to do next is simply make NuoDB, the database that works in the SciQ Analytics tool. And there's really 2 things that we need to do to make that happen. First, we have to copy the JDBC driver into the appropriate directory on the SciQ side. And then we need to add NuoDB as an additional data source into the data sources folder on the SciQ side. And what I'm going to simply do is just copy the data source that I've created here and paste it right into the appropriate file on the SciQ side. So I've already copied over the driver. It's simply just CP, the location of the driver, wherever your NuoDB installation is, and then where it belongs on the SciQ side. And let me quickly go ahead and do the same thing with this, just to show you guys what that looks like. So the first thing that I want to do is go in here, paste that in. Again, just to cheat just a little bit. So here is the data source for the MySQL driver. And let's go back in here. And I know I changed this for this particular demo, so I can go ahead and update that. And the only other thing that I need to do is make sure that the driver name is correct, and I think that it is. So I should just be able to copy this and then paste it right underneath this. Save. and then let's go back and let's stop and start. And that should do it. Okay, so once that starts back up, let's switch back into Saiku, refresh the window, and now when I click the drop down, there should be two sets of drivers or cubes available to me. And let's once again use the NuoDB one. This is the new one that we just added. Let's select sales. Let's run the same exact report that we ran before. So I'll make profit my column. Let's go back into media. Let's use product category as my row, and then product name as my other row. And as you can see, now these queries are running directly against NuoDB. And once they're done running, you can go back and create the same types of charts and graphs that you saw in the other view against MySQL. Okay, so far we've essentially replicated data out of MySQL into NuoDB, ensured that the reports still continue to function on the NuoDB side as they did on the MySQL side. So now let's get to what the big deal is. Now, if you recall the old diagram that I showed you in terms of the MySQL architecture, again, one of the things that we want to be able to help our developers with is being able to scale out with the click of a button. No doubt that people have scaled out MySQL to its limits and beyond. However, we don't believe that it should be that difficult. So very quickly, what I want to show you guys is if you're using NuoDB in conjunction with MySQL or as a replacement for MySQL, you can simply add additional machine resources and run additional processes to make the database go faster. What is this important for? Well, let's say, for example, this application starts generating lots of revenue for you. You want to add some more analysts to the system. However, concurrency might be an issue, or performance might be an issue. Well, I'm going to show you how easy it is to scale out your NuoDB database with the click of a button. What I've done is I've essentially started up a second VM. I call it VMBird02. Very creative of me, isn't it? So the only thing that I'm going to do on VMBird02 is I've pre-installed NuoDB on it, and I want to run this VM as part of the original domain that I'm running that the FoodMart database off of. And the way that I do that is I simply call out this agent jar on this VM, and I pair it up with the Birdo1 VM as an agent. So I hit enter, and as soon as I hit enter, you'll see this one host change over to two hosts. It's almost instantaneous. Now I'm running two hosts on this. So if I go into my database, I can go in and I can see how many processes are running. I can add a process when I'm in this view here. And so once again, we're in the demo DB. I want to select the host that I want to add a process to, and I want to select the new VM that just came online that just got paired up with this particular domain that I'm running. It's VMBird02, and the process that I want to add is a transaction engine. When I hit submit, it will dynamically add that transaction engine to a running database without me having to shut down NuoDB and without me having to bring it back up. So now if we go back to the main admin screen, we'll see that there's one database running, there's three processes running within that database, and if I want to add new users, those new users are connected directly to the most responsive and available transaction engine within the system. The other cool thing about this is, let's say demand has subsided for this particular application, and I no longer need to run three processes. I can just as easily select the process that I just added, and I can just as easily shut it down. And without any problems, I can go click that shutdown button, and voila, that process is gone. So that's sort of the major advantages that you get with NuoDB when you run it as an alternative to a MySQL database, or when you run it in conjunction with a MySQL database or any other database for that matter. Okay, so that concludes today's webinar, 3 steps on how to migrate from MySQL. If you have been entering your questions in the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar, we'll go ahead and start taking some of those and answering them while we still have some time. If we do not get to your question, don't worry, we'll either reach out to you individually or post the responses to our community forum available on our Dev Center. If you have not gotten a chance to ask your question, please feel free to type that into the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar window now. If you would like a step-by-step guide in terms of how we built this presentation today, please feel free to visit the NuoDB tech blog. It's nuodb.com/tech blog, and also visit the Dev Center for additional content and information. The Dev Center includes documentation, links to the tech blog, the community forum, as well as various downloads and programs that we're running specifically for developers. Once again, my name is Waqar Chaudhry, and I'm the Technology Evangelist here at NuoDB. So without further ado, let's begin answering some of your questions.